So, in this video, we're going to get started into our economic isms and we're going to take a look at capitalism first. So, if we were going on this spectrum from free market to command, what systems would we encounter along the way? Capitalism is going to be the one closest to free market. It has a lot of the same principles that a free market system does, but it does try to address some of the big problems of a free market system, and so there is some government intervention that exists here. So when we talk about capitalism, we're talking about an economic system in which private citizens and businesses own the factors of production. Now, one super duper important part to remember here is that no matter what system we're looking at, it's important to keep in mind that whoever owns the resources gets to make the decisions about the resources. Okay, so if we're looking at capitalism, we're saying, okay, private citizens, private businesses own the factors of production. That means they're the ones that get to make the decisions about what and how and for whom to produce, right? So those basic questions get answered by the consumers and producers, right? Now, the government does have some input on this, right? So it's not completely free and you can just make whatever you want with whatever products and treat workers really bad. The government will come in and say, you can't do those things, or you have to be a little bit more careful in the resources you're using, or whatever the case may be. We'll get into that a little bit more. But for the most part, these questions get answered by the consumers and the producers, right? That also means that if we're talking private citizens and private businesses, that's where the emphasis is at. And so, looking at that public or private sector, we would have a very large private sector, right? Most businesses, or sorry, most goods and services are going to come from privately owned businesses. And so, we would have some public goods. That's one of the areas that capitalism tries to address. So we're not making you pay for everything that you want to have access to. The government will be there to provide some basic things. So there will be a public sector. It will just be a small sector. The majority of your goods and services will come from privately owned companies. Now, there are a few characteristics that are really important in a capitalistic society. And as we're going through there, you're going to think, man, this sounds really familiar because the United States was founded on these principles, right? When we're started, we were very much a free market, and moved more capitalistic through our history. So these are the things that are very common here in the United States historically and should sound familiar, but this can be applied to any country that wants it, right? One of the first things that's really important is this idea of property rights, right? If you own the resources, you own your labor, you own land, you own a business, whatever the case may be, that is yours to make decision on how to use it, right? So this goes back to that idea of economic freedom, right? If you have private ownership, then you are free to make the decision about that, right? Now, in a capitalistic society, those property rights are protected by laws. So that's one of the ways the government gets involved is that they say, okay, we're going to have laws on the books that say you can't just have your stuff stolen, right? If it is, your private property is protected because there's a way to make sure whoever stole that either gives it back to you or they pay you for it or whatever the case may be. There's punishments for that, right? We have laws, or capitalistic societies would have laws on the book that protect your intellectual property, right? If you create something, an invention, or you write a song or a book, or you come up with some kind of new technology, capitalistic societies would have something there to protect that so that you are the only one that gets to benefit from that property right because it's yours, it's from your brain, your creation, right? So you would see copyright laws and trademark laws that would exist there to protect that property. And again, the only way to, if it's yours, to get it to be somebody else's is for there to be some kind of payment, some kind of transaction. Now, you could like will it to somebody or be like, hey, I want to give this to my family member because I no longer need it. That kind of thing, you're choosing to do that, right? It's not somebody else making that decision for you. So The how to produce, right? It's my business. I get to make that decision is still very valued. But the government does set some parameters and says, you have to follow these laws. But other than that, it's your business. You get to make the decisions for it, right? So private property, still really big here. And going along with that is this idea of profit motive, right? If the idea here is it's mine and I'm trying to make the most of it, that profit is what drives people to work hard, right? It's still in a capitalistic society, very individualistic. So you get out what you put in. If you want to make tons of money, you got to come up with some way to do that, right? You got to find a really high paying job. You got to come up with something creative that everybody wants. You got to do something that is going to get that money that you're looking for, right? And if you don't, then you're not going to make a ton of money, right? So that idea is still here, but it's that money, that profit that drives us to work hard. That's what drives entrepreneurs to start new businesses. And then for consumers in this system, that benefits you because now you have more choices. It encourages people to come up with better systems to do things because that saves money and that leads to more profit. It creates a way for entrepreneurs and innovators to say, hey, I see a problem in society, I want to address it, so that problem is fixed and everybody will buy it, so I'll make some money from it, right? Profit is the incentive here. That is the only thing that drives people to do the things that they're doing, at least for the most part. Not everybody, but for the most part, that's the incentive here, right? And that goes along with this idea of the invisible hand, right? We talked about the idea of supply and demand in a free market. That's the only thing that exists. Now, in capitalism, there is some government intervention, and so it's not completely the invisible hand, but it's still supply and demand principles, right? So, just to vaguely touch on this, because we're going to spend more time later talking about it. When we talk about supply, we're talking about the amount of product businesses are willing and able to offer for sale. Okay. And so when they're able to say, hey, we're going to offer more of this product because we think people want it, that's going to be good for consumers because now we have more options, more product available, but also more supply, more businesses means more competition. And when there is more competition, that leads to fair prices because one business can't try and set their prices really high if all their competitors have lower prices. Everybody will just go to those lower price places. And the person selling it at really high prices would have to lower it or go out of business, right? So the idea here is it leads to those fair prices because when supply is greater than demand, prices will fall, right? When there's more in the market than what people actually want, they're going to have to lower their prices to entice people to buy. All right. And so that's going to be benefiting consumers. It also is good because supply will focus on the needs and the wants of consumers and supply the things that we're really interested in. All right. Demand on the other side is the consumer side of things. How much are consumers willing and able to buy of a product at all possible prices? So this is how consumers answer the what to produce in a capitalistic society. What will be produced is whatever there is demand for, right? And so when businesses see that, they will produce those products because that's where the chance for profit is at. And so consumers will benefit from that. And when they change what they want to buy, businesses will adjust to that. So you're able to see that adjustment happening a little bit quicker than other systems because if they don't adjust, they lose out on that profit. Now the government will come in and we'll talk a little bit here how the government fills in some of the gaps because sometimes we don't want to pay for things, but we still want them available. But for the most part, we as consumers in a capitalistic society would control what is being produced. Now, if demand is higher than supply, you would see prices go up, right? That's the incentive for businesses to make more is, hey, we can make more profit, so let's offer more for sale, right? Now, all of this idea of supply and demand is what brings on competition, right? So in capitalistic societies, competition is really important, right? Because that gets us fair prices, that gets us lots of choices as consumers. And so that is going to be one of those guiding principles here, right? Profit also encourages us as individuals to go out and find more skilled jobs. And so we're going to have to be better trained, better educated to get those skilled jobs, because that's where the money would be, right? If everybody is able to do a job, the supply for that job is high and the demand for it is low. So it's going to be very low paying, right? If you have something that you can do that very few other people can, people are willing to pay more for it. And that's where those higher wages are going to come in. So that profit encourages not just businesses to do things better, but it encourages workers and individuals to find the best use for their labor. All right, go ahead and stop here. Go to the next video to finish talking about capitalism.